Beautiful creatures of this planet, welcome to another episode of Liga Unlock. That young man is Mark. My name is Eric. We're continuing a little bit of preseason power rankings, just a few days away now from action kicking off in both Europe and North America, because remember, there's Friday games in North America now. It's not just a slated schedule for EU. NA is also stealing some of that Friday action.
Hey, we got to take some type of magic from the LEC. If we can't bring over any players mid-split here and in the off-season, in fact,
they're just leaving.
We set one left from North America. So certainly got to find ways to take some of that magic from the LEC, and we're taking that Friday magic to start our games. But it's not LCS time. It is all time to spend time talking about LEC action.
And I think across the board, it's easier to rank the teams in Europe in the preseason than it is North America, mainly because 10-5, 10-6 at least in NA is kind of, this could go anyway, really. I don't know. 8 of these teams are making playoffs. I don't know what's going on. But Europe, I think a lot of how the spring split finished is going to carry over into summer, and that's where teams will finish. But as we start with team numero uno, which is actually number 10, it is SK Gaming, who actually underwent probably the most changes of any of the European squads, because you have a new mid laner coming in Zazie. Genax is role swapping to the top lane. Trick still on the team. The bot lane is still the same. You got Jez as head coach, but Genax role swapping and a new young mid laner coming in, and Trick staying as a jungler. That doesn't instill too much confidence for me.
You said there's a lot of changes coming through for this SK roster. I'm still not changing how I feel about this SK roster, and the big part of that is because I'm Trick starting in the jungle for them. You guys know I love to be more so on the positive side, talking about players, hyping things up, but this is a situation where it's unavoidable to say that when you look at the play from SK last split and you head into this split and you once again say that Trick is the answer for you in the jungle, I'm not buying whatsoever any bit of this one. It's got to fall to 10th place.
And even towards the end of the regular season last year, even though they finished with 2 more wins than Vitality, Vitality won a head-to-head matchup against them, and they were absolutely looking more competitive in their matches. And that is why Vitality comes in a spot ahead of them at number 9. Apparently, Melitza will be there. Visa issues should be sorted out. He's going to be starting. Cabochard's still there. Kind of surprised that NJI is the only way I'm going to try and pronounce it, who's coming over as the starting jungler. But in the teaser video for summer, you had Skeens in the video with the Vitality jersey. So I don't fully know what's going on there. Melitza wasn't in the video, but he was in it last year. So I'm still not fully sure who's going to be starting for Vitality, but I still got them ahead of SK.
We were talking about it all spring when we were finally going to get the actual Vitality roster together and finally see what they've been trying to build and what they want to have set in place and to improve upon. We didn't see it ever, and I don't know if we're going to see it in this summer split. I'm hoping. I'm very much hopeful, and from what we had seen, most of the signs before, kind of maybe even a couple of weeks ago, I had 100% confidence feeling that was what we were going to see. There still is now a bit of some question marks as far as the roster and what we're going to see from Vitality. But at least for me, it's going to be an improvement off of the spring split.
Yeah, and regardless of who's starting, I think even when things became a bit of an issue last year, they were starting to figure things out with a somewhat solid roster. It's still Jack Troll that's going to be starting at support, but they're kind of grooming for their younger support, Lebrov, to step up and take over reins for Jack Troll, because Jack Troll's number 1 on the priority list to replace on this roster pretty much as soon as you can.
Yeah, I think that's certainly one of those spots where you have to be looking at someone and looking at, obviously, their veteran status and how much it provides, but then still weigh that against, obviously, the positives of some younger, fresher talent, mechanical skill into the scene, I think could be beneficial for Vitality.
And these were the kind of bottom 2 teams throughout the majority of the spring split. Schalke was there for a bit after their, coveted 0-6 start, but they're in at number 8 because the end of the split, They went 500 and they closed it out 4-2 as soon as Forgiven left the squad. Inax fit in pretty darn well, and this roster actually looked good. They were competitive. If they hadn't had that 0-6 start, they might have been a lot closer into playoff contention. The roster's pretty much the same coming into this split. The one change is Dreams is now playing for the Academy squad, and Nukes is promoted to the starting support. Nukes is Sir Nukes a lot. He just dropped the Sir and a lot. He's just Nukes now.
Simplifying
he was deknighted.
Simplifying his name, and it is a simplified look at the Schalke lineup right now. You don't have to worry about Forgiven. He's not there, and I know that they made that statement saying, he'll be ready to be called upon for summer. Not going to be called upon. It's going to be.
Is he still looking at his phone? Hello?
Oh, you could probably turn that phone off at this point, given what's going to happen for Schalke, because it's going to be all about Inax holding down that bot lane for them. Because when you're thinking about Schalke and you're looking at everything else, yeah, you got Inax holding it down in the bot side, but everywhere else, I don't know if you're going to be able to get enough power coming through, enough highs reached in order to get to the playoff spots where Schalke would obviously love to be. I think this is going to be an improvement off of the spring split. Certainly going to show us a lot more of those signs of, we saw those incredible upsets and even putting together some of those wins at the end of the split last year in the spring, I think that is where we're going to see the continuing trend to be towards that level of play compared to the beginning of the spring split. But it's still not going to be enough to get towards that tier that they want to be against the rest of the LEC.
Yeah, and Lorox is an interesting case to see the continued development and growth of him in the jungle. Abadaga, can he be more consistent in the mid lane? Because now it's really Odawamne with a lot of young, relatively unproven talent around him, and he actually had a really good split individually. So if there's growth and Odawamne continues to stay solid, maybe they can vie for that final playoff spot, but they will be competing directly with the team ahead of them at number 7 in XL, who finally, they did it. The offseason move that people have been waiting for so long. Just give Special the starting spot. You keep bringing Mickey back to start for them, and finally, Mickey gone back to Korea, playing with APK Prince, his former squad, so they say, Special, you know what? You can finally be the starter in the LEC. Thank goodness.
Oh, I'm pretty happy about this one. This is a play that we've talked about for at least the last 2 years now, and talking about how much we thought that, look, this is a talent, there's potential here, and this is someone that give him the keys, put him in one of those driver's seats for an LEC organization, and look at what the growth can be. Now we're absolutely going to be able to see it here for sure, full force, and this is my expectation that it will propel XL even higher than where they are ranked in our preseason rankings right now. I think that they'll find a way to sneak even further up this list, given the growth that's possible for this roster.
Yeah, and they also replaced Expect with Cryzy or Cries, who was on Unicorns of Love, another young European. He's Swedish. That, listen, bring on the youth movement for XL. I gotta say, and shout out Kadril, because we memed about him a lot when he was initially on this XL roster. He's a role swap. He was part of that notoriously terrible H2K squad when he did that role swap, and there were a lot of question marks around him. But he's become a leader on XL, a shot caller. He's incredibly knowledgeable about the game, if you've heard him do any of the broadcasts on the LEC. And I was dead wrong about this guy. He has grown a lot and become a really decent jungler.
He's been a huge impact player for XL as well. That's been one of the really nice things to see actually about how his play and how he's evolved in this role for the jungle. As someone that, look, I was not convinced at all at the very beginning of this type of switch in his career. I wasn't sold, and I wasn't sold for a long time. But over the last year, I definitely would say that I've seen some improvements. And certainly, as you said, in the last split, talking, hearing him talk on the LEC broadcast and seeing a little bit more of the behind the scenes of what was going on with XL and an increased role for him, certainly have been impressed. And if you're looking for some continued growth this split, obviously that is going to be a major factor in how far this XL squad can go. And I'm banking on that potential to keep growing higher.
And the UK family staying strong, Kadril on XL. Kasing's not a starter anymore. But Kadril holding down the fort in that regard. That's just outside of the playoffs. We go to top 6, which is going to be an absolute mad race throughout the summer split. But in at number 6, it is Rogue. They finished higher than 6 in the playoffs, and honestly, it was an underwhelming split overall from them, from what we were expecting. We were expecting Rogue to maybe move into that top 3, even higher than somebody like ORIGEN in the preseason, with the addition of Hans Sama, who had a great split with Vander, but it was inspired and at times Larson not living up to the incredible amount of hype that we did build up for them, but expecting better results from Rogue in summer.
You have to be expecting better results from Rogue because the expectation was that you were going to be getting that, in the spring split, that you were going to see this continued growth of this young roster, this young organization. We did not really see that almost entirely throughout this spring split. You saw little bits, some glimpses and flashes of it for various periods, but not nearly enough the consistency that you want. It felt a lot like taking, one step forward and maybe 1.5 step backwards type of thing, where you had a little bit of growth, you had some positive signs and some good wins, but you still had too many slip-ups and too many errors that you had seen before or would like to eliminate from this squad. And that is going to be my concern heading into this split when you're looking at the rest of these playoff caliber level teams. And again, talking like an Excel squad that is hungry and looking to get into that playoff picture. That is where I think this squad for Rogue is going to absolutely have to put it on for this summer split.
And I think Rogue is just a classic case of they consistently beat the teams below them in the standings, but can't beat the ones above them. They were 0-2 against G2, FNATIC, and ORIGEN in the regular season. So, I mean, they need to step up if they want to take that next step and be considered amongst the elite of the elite in Europe. At least that top 4 category. That should be the goal for them because that's how you're getting to Worlds.
And too many times you see it against these top level teams, against a G2, against a FNATIC, where you see any type of game plan that they've put in from the draft just completely falls apart when the other squad tries to impose their will against Rogue. And that's going to be one of those things you absolutely do have to look at when you head towards these type of elite matchups, or these matchups where you think that Rogue might not be favored in, where you're going to have to start turning around those matchups and turning around those results if you want to be one of these playoff caliber and top echelon teams in the LEC.
And before they even worry about the FNATICs and G2s of the world, they got to get through number 5 on the list in MISFITS, which they did do in the playoffs in rather convincing fashion, which was probably the highlight of their spring split, was how well they played in that series against MISFITS. But they also underperformed on that day, and they also got one of the biggest off-season upgrades with Kabe coming in for Bvoy. Obviously the biggest change for them, and just how good they looked at times in the regular season. It's a shame we didn't get to see more out of them in playoffs because they were eliminated so quickly. I feel like even if they had another chance in losers bracket, we would have seen a better performing Misfit squad.
And of course, you got to jump right on to talking about the addition of Kabe to the bot side. Bvoy did very well and did actually a lot better than a lot of people would have expected from him and from the Misfits lineup when they first kind of started to play. You did not expect that level of play to come through, but it still was one of those ones where you look at the very top teams in the LEC, the G2s, the FNATICs of the LEC, and you said, you know what, you're just coming up short in that one little spot. Yes, there's obviously advantages being earned by those squads elsewhere, but that was the biggest issue. And obviously, what a situation that Misfits find themselves in, where Kabe is all of a sudden available and looking to come back home for free. It is a great situation for them. And look, I know that Kabe didn't maybe light the world on fire over in North America that people had wanted to or expected to see a player of his skill and talent come through. There's a lot of factors that played into it. And yes, some of those are in Kabe's hands and some of them are not. But when you're looking at him returning to the LEC, back with Misfits, back home in Europe, this is exactly what you want to be talking about if you're a Kabe fan, because I bet you that you're going to be seeing a lot more of those plays that you are used to seeing from Kabe as a star-focused player like he will be with Misfits.
And the biggest question for me is actually Febivin. Does he continue to play at that level that he did throughout spring? Because even though Razork is less experienced than a guy like Febivin. I have faith that he'll be able to replicate his performance that he did. Febivin, he's had so many underwhelming splits in the last few years. I'm very curious to see if he can keep it up. Having all this youth around him is definitely going to help, and everybody's hungry to win on that roster because they've either never won a title or you're Febivin, and it's been, I don't know, about half a decade since you won a title in Europe.
You're right. And as much as, we love Febivin and love to fanboy for one of the old OGs of the strong mid laners, it is certainly a player that we have seen the high highs come through and then a little bit of what I'd like to call, obviously, a bit of a slump for a couple of splits that would usually fall through. And of course, recently, we've been able to blame that completely on NA Mental, NA Solo Queue, making it go boom. That's not the case. You're over in the LEC. You're eating good in Europe. Let's see you continue that form heading into summer.
So MISFITS, even though they exited early, come in at number 5. Number 4 is another team that was supposed to be fighting with FNATIC and G2 at the very top. It is ORIGEN. And talk about hungry for an LEC title. Nukeduck upset, Alfari, Xerxes even now have all been around for 3 years without, they've gotten to one final, kind of, some of them here and there, but it's been a long time without a title in the LEC, and ORIGEN is a team that perennially is slept on because their playstyle is a little bit more boring than most of the other teams in the EU, and at times that has definitely been their weakness. So I'm hoping that they improve, adapt, and just show more variety and flexibility in how they play the game.
I think when you're looking at ORIGEN and you're looking at the roster, there's nothing you really want to be tinkering around with too much. And you said it. It's the play style. It's the play style. It's the coaching staff. That type of situation of what goes in the preparation and how they handle certain things in certain situations. That's what I would be looking at if you're talking about ORIGEN and how do you improve and how do you succeed, because you're looking up and down this lineup. You've got some of the best talented players in Europe. You've got a lot of players and play styles that seem to fit together and want to work together. This seems to be the equation to get through and be one of those top teams. But time and time again, we've had that answer come through that the play style is not going to work against these teams that are also incredibly highly skilled, but are more creative or more risk takers in the way that they want to play the game. It's just not working for ORIGEN. And we've seen this now for continued splits. And that is my concern heading into this summer, is that yes, you're going to be a good team to a very good team in the LEC. And you're going to be pushing for one of these top spots. And you're going to be up in that conversation a lot of the time. But how can I give you that credibility of getting ahead of a G2, of getting ahead of a FNATIC, if every time we've seen that answer come through and every time it's been before the same reason, that it's not actually the individuals of the players or what's going on. It's from the mindset. It's from the set, strategies of what you're going through. That is where you are being done wrong. And that is where I'd love to see fixed for this summer ORIGEN, the summer run for ORIGEN.
And despite at times looking like one of the more dominant teams in the LEC in the regular season, the reason they're not in the top 3 is because they couldn't do what Mad Lions did. I'm talking playoffs, of course. Mad Lions, even the regular season, they had a win against G2 and FNATIC, but they played a full 12 games throughout the playoffs. So there was a whole lot to go off of for them. And they did what even FNATIC couldn't do in beating G2, this roster of G2, in a best of 5. And even when they played them again, they ended up losing. It was a competitive series again. So for a bunch of rookies to already be competing with G2 and FNATIC, not just in best of 1s, but best of 5s as well, even though they did get obliterated by FNATIC in that 3-0. But I was just incredibly impressed with how aggressive most of the players are on this roster and how well they fit together.
A lot of the doubters, and I'll even say haters, I don't want to say haters too much because I think a lot of people will feel pretty positive about this team, but there are certainly always going to be some people that want to hate on young success. And when you look at this roster and what they've been able to accomplish, it is that young success coming through. And that's going to be the question in summer. Does that continue, or do we see the slip up? Do we see that fall back? Do we see the other teams with a lot more games in VODs to review for, to prepare against your specific play styles, your preferences, how you do, champion pools, things of that nature are all going to be, all more information are in the hands of your enemy now to prepare against you. And of course, that's been something that's existed at all sorts of levels throughout your career and type of time. But it always, of course, changes when you're at the big top level of the LEC main stage. And that's certainly going to be what this squad has to be looking at as far as making sure that they can continue the success and positive story of the spring in this summer.
And with 50 points already towards Worlds, 4 teams going from the LEC, this is a great opportunity for all these guys, these cocky guys. At least Carzy is very cocky for being so young in his, not just career, but in life. This guy's still a teenager to be so arrogant going up against some of the biggest names in the LEC. I love it. That's the kind of trash talk. I mean, of course, Perks is the cockiest guy in the league. He should be. Because he's been the best for 4+ years. But I love the attitude and mentality out of Carzy. This entire roster just seems so hungry to win and really seem to love playing together, even though we didn't see a lot of actual stage time for them in the playoffs. They just seem like they're having a fun time.
Hey, you talked about Perks, Carzy. Well, Carzy better get ready to face off against Perks this split. That's going to be one of the big differences coming through. Is that it's not
that ain't
Caps. It's not Caps and it's not Craps. This is Perks down there. This is going to be reclaiming his lane kingdom down in the bottom side is what Perks is going to be looking to do. And yes, that's a lot of talk about Perks, but it's the focus from Carzy, because that's the real challenge right now. When you talk about ADCs in the LEC, you talk about Reckless, you talk about Upset, you talk about Kave, but you gotta always keep that mind open for young guns coming through, and Carzy is absolutely that young gun coming through, and this is the big test for him right now, because Perks is gonna be ready to reclaim that throne down there, and this is what I'm talking about, because yes, there's a lot of young, exciting players and good stories to follow through with this team. But for me, it's all about the summer, and it's going to be all about Carzy continuing his play and continuing his progression and growth. And how does he stack up against Perks back in the bot side?
You're right. There's plenty of interesting stories, young talent, new rookies that continue to be churned out in Europe. But in the end, the top 2 are the same. It's been the same since 2017. They've flip-flopped a couple of times. But number 2, it's FNATIC. They couldn't get it done again against G2 in a best of. It wasn't a reverse sweep this time. It was just you plain got blasted by the G2 boys. But FNATIC, it's the same roster coming back as it should be, even though Bwipo fell off a cliff when the playoffs rolled around against G2. That shouldn't take away from how fantastic he was in the regular season and even the series right before the finals against Mad Lions. Bwipo is still one of the elite top laners in the LEC and gives such an added dimension for this FNATIC roster.
When I'm looking at this FNATIC roster and all 5 players, I don't have any issues questioning if they're going to perform in the big moments, right? I don't have anything thinking to myself now, oh man, is Bwipo again? Is he going to choke again in one of these type of big matchups? That's not at all what you see with this FNATIC roster. And of course, yes, there are those slip ups in these big moments, but they're certainly not from that type of trait. When you talk about the 2 kings of Europe, of course, it is G2 and FNATIC. I think this is certainly going to be an interesting summer split, given that I think the teams we've talked about, from 5 all the way to 3 will be certainly able to fight and try to make their claim to put themselves into this conversation. But as you said, it's been years that this has been the conversation, and there's a reason why it's been this conversation. When you're talking about FNATIC, it is the consistency of their players, consistency of the staff to find these players and to groom them through. Look, we talked about it in spring that I thought in a best of 5 perfect performance, FNATIC would edge out G2. But what did we get in the finals? Absolutely not perfect performance. And that's almost
about
always
a 30% performance level, maybe.
Right. And that's almost always how it comes through. So obviously, G2 has got to be the top one heading into this. But if you're a FNATIC fan, you're looking for any hope, I want you to hold on to that idea that if you're playing at your very best, I'm still taking FNATIC. I'm still putting my money on FNATIC at the very peak. that is the top squad in the LEC. But your question, Fnatic fans, is going to be how often you are that peak squad in the LEC.
And for Selfmade, it's his first loss in the finals. But the other 4 guys on this Fnatic roster, God, they've got to be tired to losing to G2. And I don't know if that's just more sadness for them or if they're just so fiery and fueled to finally take down this G2 roster. Either way, huge favorites. They'll be going to Worlds. Both these guys are going to Worlds. It'd be devastating if they weren't. But you're right. G2, 3 in a row. They're number 1, and the biggest acquisition, of course. Some big changes for them. John coming back, joining the roster, and Craps is leaving the roster. So those are the big off-season moves for G2.
And it's a legendary level of move for G2, adding back this historic player in John Perkz down to the bot lane. And that's going to be the big focal point for me, of course, for G2. Yes, Caps going to the mid lane and bringing back our loved play style of how often Caps is able to absolutely roam and appear in every other lane and making the living hell for the other team. Yeah, I love watching that too. But it's going to be the big focus for me is Perkz returning down to that bottom side, and just the matchup that we just talked about in our last team at number 2, the matchup against Reckless down in that bottom side, the ADCs, the historic matchup, of course, that we're talking about. And the best thing here is, yes, Perkz got the better of Reckless, almost to everybody's opinion. The last time that Perkz was down playing in the bottom side, and this past split, we just had Reckless reclaim his throne and taking it away and proving that, yeah, certainly is the best of the traditional ADCs. Now we get the rematch. Here we go. Who's it going to be?
For guys like Comp and Carzzy, not rookies anymore, but going into their second split, they are part of the most stacked pool of 80 carries we might have ever seen in Europe. Perkz, Reckless, Kobbe comes back. Upset, of course. Even that top 4 alone, one of them's not making an all-pro team. That's insane in itself.
And then you got guys like Patrick on the outside looking in that aren't bad ADCs by any
Not
means
all.
whatsoever.
Star players.
So this is all right. There's a lot of star power in the LEC, but absolutely at the ADC position, boys are lined up and ready to take their shot.
Yeah, and we definitely saw a higher peaks. It was only one split we had Caps at 80 carry, but still feel like this team can reach a higher ceiling. If they're actually swapping positions within series, but that's pretty difficult to pull out. At least they've got to be stronger with Perkz at bot lane. That's it.
Oh yeah, I'm fully of the idea that they are a lot stronger with Perkz down in the bot lane and having Caps' champion pool, expanded in the mid lane as well as his ability to roam and impact other. Yeah, Ziggs is the one that's taken away when he goes to the mid lane for sure. But when you think about that and you're thinking about having Perkz down, that's what you want, and that's what you want to be seeing from G2 as far as the dominance that you can be getting from these players.
An absolute shocker. You wouldn't believe it. What a twist. G2 and Fnatic 1 and 2 on the LEC Power Rankings. Games finally get going on Friday. We will recap all the Week 1 action eventually as it happens. But that's it today for League Unlocked. Mark and Eric here with you guys as always. Thanks for hanging out with us. Catch you guys and gals on the Flippity Flop.